The Galactic Academy's Deathworld Trial had broken stronger beings than any of them. 45 cadets, 45 failures, and the simulation hadn't even reached its third phase. Commander Vexael stood at the observation deck, his forearms folded across his chest, his compound eyes scanning the recovery pods where the broken cadets lay sedated, each one pulled from the trial after their minds shattered under the pressure. Crictians, Velinari, Shreth warriors who had survived 3 civil wars, all reduced to trembling husks. And then there was Cadet Arya Chun, human, female, 23 years old by Earth's ridiculous solar counting system. Ranked 46th in her cohort, dead last on the entrance assessments. She was still inside. Cadet Kale, a Shreth, gray-skinned and 7 feet of engineered muscle, had lasted the longest before her. 11 hours and 42 minutes inside the Deathworld simulation before the isolation protocols cracked something behind his eyes that the medics said might never fully heal. Kale was considered the best of them, the pride of the Shreth military breeding program. He had been engineered for exactly this kind of endurance. He had lasted 11 hours. Arya had been inside for 19. The Deathworld trial was not designed to be survivable. That was the point. The simulation recreated the conditions of Class 9 Death Worlds, planets so hostile that most spacefaring civilizations quarantined them at the system boundary and never looked back. Crushing gravity, atmospheric toxins, temperature swings that could boil liquid in the morning and freeze solid rock by evening. Megafauna that had evolved specifically to consume anything that breathed. And layered on top of all the physical horror, the psychological component. Isolation. Sensory manipulation. The simulation whispered to the cadets in their sleep. It were the faces of people they loved. It was meant to teach cadets their limits. The Academy believed that knowing your breaking point was more valuable than pretending you didn't have one. No one was expected to pass. The trial had no passing condition. It only had an exit condition. When the cadets' psychological coherence index dropped below 40%, the simulation ejected them automatically. 45 cadets, 45 ejections. Arya Chin's coherence index had not dropped. It had risen. Inside the simulation, it was the 47th hour when the environment finally threw its worst at her. The Death World had taken the shape of a crashed colony ship, a deliberately cruel choice by the simulation's adaptive AI, which had read her psychological profile and selected the scenario most likely to break her. The wreckage stretched across 3 kilometers of hostile terrain. Toxic amber fog rolled in every 6 hours. The local predators, things with too many legs and not enough hesitation, had learned her schedule. Arya had learned theirs faster. She moved through the wreckage with the calm efficiency of someone completing a chore list. She had built a shelter on the second day using hull plating and a basic understanding of aerodynamics she'd picked up from an elective course she almost hadn't taken. She had identified 3 edible fungal variants growing in the ship's decomposing organic material by the 3rd day, cross-referencing her memory of basic xenobotany against the simulation's environmental feedback. She had killed 4 of the large predators, not because she enjoyed it, but because their remains were useful. Protein, hide, bone tools. On day 6, the simulation deployed its psychological weapon, her mother's voice, coming from somewhere in the fog. Arya had stopped walking. She had stood very still for approximately 90 seconds, her eyes closed. The observers watching from outside held their breath. This was always the moment. This was where the index dropped. Arya opened her eyes. She said, quietly, to the empty fog, "Nice try," and kept walking. In the observation room, nobody spoke for a long time after that. Commander Vexael finally broke the silence. "What is her homeworld classification?" Lieutenant Sarah, a Velinari who had been assigned to monitor the human cohort, pulled up the file. "Earth. Sol System. Standard Class 3, sir." "Class 3. Vexael repeated the words as if testing their weight. Class 3 meant temperate, mild, manageable seasons, liquid water in abundance. By galactic standards, Earth was considered a pleasant, unremarkable little world where nothing particularly lethal had ever developed. "Yes, sir. And she is performing like this because—" Sarah hesitated. She had been trying to answer that question herself for the past 2 days. "We're not entirely sure, sir. Her psychological profile is unusual. Her stress hormone analogs are elevated, but not to crisis levels. Her problem-solving index has actually improved since the simulation began. And her coherence. Her coherence index is at 91%. Vexael said it flatly. After 47 hours. Yes, sir. Kale's coherence was at 38% after 11 hours. Yes, sir. The commander was quiet for another moment. Outside the viewport, in the simulation space, a tiny human figure climbed over a piece of wreckage, assessed the horizon with shaded eyes, and changed direction with complete confidence. Pull her file, he said. Everything. Not the Academy file. The Homeworld file. What the Homeworld file told them, when Sarah finally assembled it, was not reassuring. Earth was Class 3, technically, but Class 3 referred to the dominant environmental conditions of the habitable zones. What the standard classification system failed to adequately note was that Earth had also produced, over the course of its geological history, predators that had competed with the human line for millions of years. Things with teeth the size of a human hand. Things that could see in the dark. Things that moved silently through tall grass. The humans had not been the apex predator by default. They had won the position. Slowly, painfully, with tools made of sharpened rock. The file noted that early human settlements had been built in hostile terrain, through ice ages and droughts and floods, without any of the technological infrastructure that most spacefaring civilizations considered the baseline requirement for species survival. The file noted that human sleep cycles had been shaped, over evolutionary history, by the need to post guards, because being unconscious in the ancestral environment was dangerous enough that the species had developed the ability to sleep in shifts, lightly, always half listening. The file noted that human children's literature, the stories told to the young to help them process the world, was saturated with death, abandonment, starvation, and predation. And the children found these stories comforting. Sarah stared at that line for a long time. She thought about the simulation using Arya's mother's voice. She thought about Arya's 90-second pause. She thought about what it meant that Arya had recognized the manipulation not because she was unaffected, but because she had grown up in a culture that had told her, from childhood, that the world would try to frighten her, and that the correct response was to name the fear and keep moving. Nice try. On the 53rd hour, Arya Chun walked out of the simulation. She didn't wait for the ejection. She completed the full environmental survey the trial's secondary objective had set, the objective that none of the previous 45 cadets had lived long enough to reach, logged her findings in the simulation's data archive, and triggered the voluntary exit protocol. She emerged from the pod blinking against the light of the observation room, her dark hair matted against the side of her face, wearing the expression of someone who had stayed up too late finishing a project. Commander Vexael was waiting. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back at him without any particular expression, neither pride nor exhaustion, just a mild, patient attention. Cadet Chun, he said slowly. How? Arya considered the question. She tilted her head slightly. I grew up in a country with monsoon seasons, sir, she said. And I was pre-med before I changed to command track. The fog chemistry wasn't that different from the industrial district I did my hospital rotation in. She paused. Also, my college roommate used to do the voice thing when she wanted to borrow my jacket. You get used to it. Vexael stared at her. The predators were the easiest part, she added helpfully. Their movement patterns were very similar to the canids back home. Predictable, once you know what to look for. The commander looked at Lieutenant Sarah. Sarah looked back at him. They both looked at the tiny human woman, who was now quietly checking whether the simulation pod had damaged her jacket cuffs. Cadet Chun, Vexael said finally, his voice carrying the weight of a being who was actively revising several long-held assumptions about the universe. Report to the Advanced Command Track Orientation at 0700. Arya Chun straightened. A small, professional smile. Yes, sir. She walked out. Behind her, 45 recovery pods hummed quietly. Somewhere down the corridor, Kale was just beginning to wake up, still flinching from shadows that were no longer there. The Deathworld Trial had been designed to show cadets their limits. For Arya Chun, it had mostly just shown her what the galaxy considered terrifying. She found that interesting.